Widow evicted along with her daughters, and the farmer's gesture surprises everyone. The morning began like many others, quiet and heavy with worry. The widow woke before sunrise in the small rented house that had once felt like a safe place. The walls were thin, the paint was peeling, and the roof leaked when it rained, but it had been a home. Now it felt temporary, like everything else in her life since her husband passed away. She sat up slowly, careful not to wake her two daughters who slept beside each other on a thin mattress. Their faces were calm in sleep, innocent and unaware of the fear their mother carried every day. She watched them for a moment, memorizing the peaceful look she wished she could protect forever. Then she stood, wrapped her shawl tightly around herself, and went to the small kitchen. There was very little food left. She boiled water for tea and broke the last piece of bread into 3 parts, setting them aside for later. Every small decision mattered now. Since her husband's death, she had taken cleaning work, sewing work, and any small job she could find. Some days she earned enough for food, some days she did not. Still, she tried her best to keep her daughters clean, fed, and hopeful. That morning her heart felt heavier than usual. She had known this day might come. For weeks, the landlord had been sending messages through neighbors, reminding her about the unpaid rent. She had begged for more time, explaining her situation again and again. Each time, he had listened with a blank face, offering no answer. As the sun rose higher, the girls woke up. The younger one rubbed her eyes and smiled. "Mama, is today a school day?" she asked. The widow smiled back even though her chest tightened. "Yes," she said softly. "Get ready." She helped them wash and dress in their clean but worn clothes. She braided their hair carefully, her hands steady even though her thoughts were not. She wanted them to look neat, like normal children, so no one would guess how close they were to losing everything. Just as they finished their small breakfast, there was a knock on the door. It was not loud, but it was firm. The widow froze. She knew who it was before she even reached the door. When she opened it, the landlord stood there with 2 men from the local office. He did not greet her. He held a paper in his hand and spoke in a flat voice, explaining that the time was over. The house was no longer hers to stay in. She tried to speak, her voice shaking as she explained that she had some money saved and could pay part of the rent. She promised to pay the rest soon. He did not listen. He only pointed to the paper and said the decision had been made. Her daughters stood behind her, holding onto her clothes. They did not fully understand the words, but they understood the tension. The older one looked at the men with wide eyes, fear growing in her chest. Neighbors slowly began to gather outside. Some whispered to each other. Some looked away. No one stepped forward to help. The widow felt exposed, as if her private pain was now on display for everyone to see. She went inside and began packing what little they owned. A few clothes, some old photographs, school books, and a blanket. Her hands moved automatically, but inside she felt numb. This house had been the last place where her husband's laughter still seemed to echo. Leaving it felt like losing him all over again. The landlord watched from the doorway, checking his watch. He was not cruel in words, but his silence was sharp. When she finished packing, he stepped aside to let her pass. There was no goodbye. She stepped out of the house with her daughters and their belongings. The sun was now fully up, shining brightly as if mocking her pain. The street looked the same as always, but her life had changed completely. Her younger daughter asked, "Mama, where are we going?" The widow swallowed hard. "We will figure it out," she said gently, even though she had no answer. They walked slowly down the dirt road, pulling their belongings on a small cart. Every step felt heavy. People watched from their windows and doorways. Some faces showed pity, some showed discomfort, but none offered a place to stay. As they reached the edge of the village, she stopped. Her legs felt weak. She sat down on the cart and hugged her daughters close. She told them stories to keep them calm, stories her husband used to tell them before bedtime. She spoke of strong women, of kindness, of hope. She wanted them to believe that life could still be good. Inside, fear grew stronger. Night would come soon. She had no money for shelter, no family nearby, no plan. Across the road, beyond a simple wooden fence, a farmer stood watching. He did not come closer. He did not speak. He only observed quietly, his eyes following the small family. To others, he looked like a man who did not care. To the widow, he was just another stranger. She gathered her daughters and stood again, determined not to break in front of them. Whatever happened next, she would face it standing. As they moved forward, she did not know that this moment, this painful beginning, would soon lead to something no one in the village expected. For now, all she knew was loss, uncertainty, and the responsibility of protecting her children with nothing but her courage and love. The widow and her daughters moved slowly along the dirt road, their small cart making a soft sound as it rolled over stones. The sun climbed higher and the air grew warmer, but her body felt cold from inside. She kept her head up, not wanting the children to see fear on her face. Each step forward felt like a question with no answer. Behind the wooden fence, the farmer continued to watch. He was a tall man with a quiet face, marked by years of hard work under the open sky. His hands rested on the fence as if it were a part of him. He had lived on this land for most of his life. He had seen many seasons change, many people come and go. Yet something about this moment held him still. He knew the widow, not personally, but enough to recognize her strength. He had seen her leave early in the mornings to work and return late with tired eyes. He had noticed how she always walked with her daughter's clothes, one hand holding each of them, as if she were guarding something precious. He had seen her struggle quietly, never asking for help. The farmer was not known for kindness or cruelty. People described him as distant, a man who kept to himself. He spoke only when necessary and trusted actions more than words. Many believed he cared only for his crops and animals. They did not know how much he noticed or remembered. As the widow and her daughters reached the edge of his fields, the farmer felt an old ache in his chest. Years ago, he had lost his sister. She too had been a widow, left alone with a child after her husband passed away. Back then, no one had helped her. She had suffered in silence, moving from place to place, always trying to survive. By the time he had been able to offer help, it was too late. The memory never left him. He watched the children walk carefully, their small feet struggling on the uneven ground. He saw how the older daughter tried to act brave, even though fear showed in her eyes. He saw how the younger one stayed close to her mother, holding tightly to her hand. The widow noticed the farmer then. She felt his eyes on them and turned her head slightly. For a moment their eyes met. She did not ask for help. She did not speak. She only nodded politely, the way people do when they have nothing left to offer but dignity. The farmer nodded back but said nothing. The widow looked away and continued walking. In her heart she expected nothing. Too many people had already watched her suffer without lifting a finger. The farmer stayed by the fence long after they passed. His thoughts grew heavy. He told himself that it was not his problem. Everyone had their own struggles. He had his land, his responsibilities, his quiet life. Still, his feet did not move. Later that afternoon, the widow found a shaded spot near the fields and stopped to rest. The children were tired and hungry. She gave them the last pieces of bread she had saved. She pretended she was not hungry, telling them she had already eaten. They believed her, and that made her smile, even as her stomach ached. As the girls rested, the widow looked around, searching for any sign of hope. The land stretched wide and empty. There were no houses nearby, no clear path forward. The thought of night coming filled her with fear. She wrapped her arms around herself and whispered a silent prayer. From a distance, the farmer saw them sitting there. He saw the widow's shoulders sag just for a moment when she thought no one was looking. That small moment broke something inside him. He turned away from the fence and walked toward his farmhouse, his steps slow but firm. Inside his home, everything was simple and clean. He washed his hands, poured himself a glass of water, and sat at the table. He tried to distract himself, but his thoughts returned again and again to the family outside. He remembered his sister's face, tired and hopeless, and the promise he had made to himself after her passing: never ignore someone in need again. As the sun began to lower, the farmer stepped outside once more. He looked toward the fields. The widow and her daughters were still there. They had not moved. The children were now playing quietly with small stones, trying to pass the time. The widow watched them, her eyes filled with both love and worry. The farmer felt a decision forming in his heart, though he did not yet know what he would do. He was not a man who acted without thinking. He believed that help should be given wisely, not loudly. He did not want attention or praise. Meanwhile, people in the village continued their lives. Some talked about the eviction, shaking their heads. Some blamed the widow, saying life was hard for everyone. Others felt uncomfortable and chose not to think about it at all. No one came to check on her. As evening approached, the air grew cooler. The widow pulled the blanket around her daughters and sat close to them. She told them to stay near her no matter what. Her voice was calm, but inside she was preparing herself for a difficult night. She noticed the farmer walking across his land, moving slowly toward them. Her heart began to beat faster. She did not know what he wanted. She had learned not to expect kindness. Still, she stood up, holding her daughter's hands. The farmer stopped a short distance away. He looked at the children first, then at the widow. His face showed no strong emotion. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence felt long and heavy. Finally, he spoke in a low, steady voice. He did not ask questions. He did not make promises. He simply said that the night would be cold and that they should not stay out there too long. His words were few, but his tone was not unkind. The widow thanked him politely. She expected him to walk away after that. Instead, he stood there for another moment, as if thinking. "I will come back later," he said simply. Then he turned and walked away, leaving her confused. She watched him go, unsure of what to feel. Hope tried to rise in her heart, but she pushed it down. Hope had disappointed her before. As darkness slowly covered the land, the widow held her daughters close. She did not know what the farmer meant or if he would truly return. All she knew was that, for the first time since morning, someone had spoken to her without judgment. In the quiet of the fields, unseen by the village, a choice was being formed. A choice that would soon change not only the widow's life, but the hearts of everyone who believed kindness had limits. Night slowly settled over the fields, bringing with it a deep and uneasy silence. The sky darkened, and a few stars appeared one by one. The widow sat on the ground with her daughters pressed close to her sides. She wrapped the thin blanket around them, trying to block the cold air that moved gently across the land. The girls were tired, their energy fading, but sleep did not come easily. The younger daughter rested her head on her mother's lap and asked in a small voice if they would be safe there. The widow stroked her hair and told her that everything would be fine. Her voice was calm, but her heart was full of worry. She watched the road carefully, listening to every sound. Each rustle in the grass made her alert. She felt responsible for every breath her children took. The older daughter tried to be strong. She sat quietly, looking at the sky, counting stars to distract herself. Sometimes she asked questions about their future, about school, about where they would go in the morning. The widow answered with gentle words, even when she did not know the truth herself. She knew her daughters needed hope more than facts. Time passed slowly. The air grew colder, and the blanket felt thinner with each passing moment. The widow pulled her daughters closer and began telling them a story. It was one her husband used to tell them when they were afraid. She spoke of a long journey, of people who found help when they least expected it. As she spoke, her voice steadied, and for a moment the fear eased. From his farmhouse, the farmer could see the small shape of the family in the distance. A single lantern glowed softly near them, casting weak light on the ground. He stood near his window, watching quietly. He had brought the lantern earlier and placed it nearby without saying much, hoping it would help them through the night. Now he wondered if that small act was enough. He tried to sleep, but his mind would not rest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his sister again, standing in the rain with her child, waiting for help that never came. He turned on his bed and stared at the ceiling. The silence of his house felt heavy, almost accusing. Finally, he sat up and swung his feet to the floor. He knew that waiting until morning would not be right. He put on his coat and stepped outside. The night air was sharp, but his steps were firm. He picked up a small bag and headed toward the fields. When the widow saw him approaching, she stood up quickly, holding her daughter's clothes. Her body tensed, unsure of what to expect. The farmer stopped a few steps away and lifted his hand slightly, a quiet gesture to show he meant no harm. He spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully. He told her that the night would be difficult and that the land could be unforgiving after dark. He did not offer sympathy or long explanations. He only said that no one should spend the night outside with children. The widow listened silently. She had heard many words in her life that led to nothing. Still, something in his voice felt different. There was no judgment, no impatience, just a simple concern. She thanked him again, her voice respectful but guarded. She expected him to leave after speaking, like others had done before. Instead, he handed her the small bag. Inside were some bread and warm clothes for the children. He told her it was not much, but it might help until morning. Her hands shook slightly as she accepted it. She felt a mix of gratitude and embarrassment. She did not want to feel like a burden. The farmer seemed to sense this. He told her she did not owe him anything. His tone was firm, as if he did not want her to refuse. The children looked at the bag with wide eyes. The younger one smiled for the first time that day. The widow felt tears rise, but she blinked them away. She did not want to cry in front of her children or this quiet man who stood before her. The farmer hesitated for a moment, then spoke again. He told her to stay where she was for now and that he would return shortly. His words were calm, but they carried weight. The widow nodded, though she did not fully understand what he planned to do. As he walked away, she watched his figure disappear into the darkness. Her heart felt lighter, but fear still lingered. She had learned not to trust hope too easily. The night grew deeper. The children ate some of the bread and soon fell asleep, curled close to their mother. The widow stayed awake, listening to the sounds of the land. She thought about her past, about her husband's laughter, about the home they once shared. She wondered if her daughters would remember this night or if it would fade like a bad dream. Far away, the farmer was busy. He walked to a small cottage on the edge of his land, a place he had not visited in years. The door creaked as he opened it. Dust covered the floor and the air smelled old, but the walls were strong and the roof was solid. This house held memories, some painful, some warm. It had once belonged to his sister. He lit a lamp and looked around slowly. He imagined children's voices filling the space again, life returning to the silent rooms. The thought made his chest tighten. He knew what he had to do. Back in the fields, the widow heard footsteps. She sat up straight, her heart racing. The farmer appeared again, this time with purpose in his stride. He stopped near her and spoke quietly so as not to wake the children. He told her that he had a place where they could rest. Not just for the night, but longer if she was willing. His words were simple, but their meaning was heavy. The widow stared at him, unsure if she had heard correctly. She asked him to repeat himself. He did, just as calmly. He explained that the cottage was empty and safe. He said she could stay there and figure out her next steps in peace. The widow felt her knees weaken. She held onto her daughters, overwhelmed by emotion. She wanted to ask questions, to understand why he was helping her, but no words came. The farmer did not wait for a long answer. He simply told her to wake the children gently and follow him. He would explain more in the morning. As they walked through the dark fields, the widow felt something she had not felt in a long time: relief. It was quiet and fragile, but it was there. She did not know what tomorrow would bring. She did not know how long this kindness would last. But as she stepped into the small cottage and closed the door behind her children, she knew that this night of fear had become a turning point. Outside, the stars continued to shine, and in the quiet of the land, a simple act of humanity began to change everything. Morning arrived softly, as if the world itself wanted to be gentle. Pale light slipped through the small windows of the cottage and rested on the worn wooden floor. The widow woke first. For a moment, she did not move. She listened. There was no wind cutting through the walls, no distant noise of danger, only calm. She slowly sat up and looked around. The room was simple but clean. A small table stood near the wall, 2 chairs beside it. A shelf held a few old dishes. The air smelled of fresh morning and earth, not dust or fear. Her daughters were still asleep, curled together under the blanket, their faces peaceful. Seeing them safe brought a tight ache to her chest. She stood quietly and went to the window. Outside, the field stretched wide and golden in the early light. Birds moved across the sky. Somewhere in the distance, she heard animals waking for the day. For the first time in many weeks, her shoulders relaxed. A gentle knock came at the door. She froze for a second, then walked toward it. When she opened it, the farmer stood there holding a small basket. He greeted her with a simple nod. Inside the basket were eggs, fresh milk, and bread. He placed it on the table without ceremony. He did not speak much. He only said that the children would wake soon and should eat. Then he turned to leave. The widow stopped him. Her voice shook slightly as she thanked him. She told him she would repay him somehow, someday. He paused and looked at her calmly. He said there was no debt. He said people help each other, and that was all. Before leaving, he added one more thing. He told her the cottage could be hers to stay in. There was no rent, only respect. If she wished to work, there would be tasks on the farm when she was ready. If not, that was fine too. The choice was hers. After he left, the widow stood still for a long moment. The weight of his words slowly settled in. This was not just shelter for one night. This was safety, time, dignity. The girls woke soon after. When they saw where they were, their eyes filled with wonder. The younger one ran to the window and laughed softly, pointing at a chicken passing by. The older one looked at her mother, reading her face carefully. "Are we staying?" she asked. The widow nodded. Tears filled her eyes, but this time she did not hide them. She hugged her daughters tightly. "Yes," she said. "For now, we are safe." They ate together at the small table. It was a simple meal, but it felt like a celebration. The widow watched her daughters eat with appetite she had not seen in days. Their laughter returned, quiet but real. Later that morning, the farmer returned. This time, he brought tools and supplies. He showed the widow how the stove worked, where water could be drawn, and how to lock the door at night. He explained things slowly, patiently, never making her feel small or ungrateful. As they spoke, people from the village began to notice movement near the old cottage. Whispers spread. Some walked closer, pretending to be curious about the land. Others stood at a distance, watching. By midday, the news had reached everyone. The widow who had been evicted now lived on the farmer's land, not as a guest for a night, but as someone given a place. Reactions were mixed. Some villagers felt surprised. Others felt uncomfortable. A few felt ashamed. They remembered how they had watched silently while the woman and her children were pushed out of their home. The landlord heard too. He dismissed it with a shrug, saying the farmer could do what he wanted with his land. But inside, he felt something he did not want to name. The farmer did not respond to the talk. He continued his work as usual. He plowed his fields, fed his animals, and repaired a broken fence. In the afternoon, he returned to the cottage and asked the widow if she felt strong enough to help with small tasks. She agreed. Not because she felt she had to, but because she wanted to stand on her own feet again. He showed her how to collect eggs, how to organize tools, how to keep the storage room clean. He spoke little, but his trust was clear. The widow worked with care. Each task, no matter how small, made her feel more human again, more capable, more alive. The children spent the afternoon outside, chasing butterflies and playing in the grass. Their laughter carried across the fields. The farmer paused in his work once or twice to watch them. A faint smile crossed his face, one that disappeared as quickly as it came. As days passed, the routine continued. The widow cleaned, cooked, and helped where she could. The farmer treated her with respect, never as someone in need of saving, but as a person rebuilding her life. The village continued to watch. Some neighbors began to bring small offerings, fruit, old clothes, books for the children. They did not always speak, but their actions said enough. The widow accepted with gratitude, but she never begged. She stood taller now. Her daughters noticed the change. They became lighter, more curious, more confident. One evening, as the sun dipped low, the widow stood outside the cottage watching the sky turn warm with color. The farmer joined her, standing a short distance away. She thanked him again, this time with steady words. She told him he had done more than give them a place to live. He had given them time to breathe. He listened quietly. When she finished, he nodded. He said he had once waited too long to help someone he loved. He would not make that mistake again. They stood in silence after that, watching the fields rest under the fading light. In the village, people spoke differently now. Some felt regret. Others felt inspired. A few began helping others quietly without praise. What began as one simple gesture had started something larger. Not loud, not dramatic, but real. And for the widow and her daughters, each new morning felt less like survival and more like the beginning of a future they could finally imagine. Days slowly turned into weeks, and the cottage no longer felt like a borrowed space. It became a home shaped by routine, warmth, and quiet hope. The widow woke each morning with purpose. She no longer opened her eyes with fear of the unknown. Instead, she listened to the sounds of the farm waking up and planned her day with calm thoughts. Her daughters adjusted quickly. They returned to school, walking each morning with clean clothes and bright faces. Their teachers noticed the change. The girls were more focused, more confident. They spoke about the fields, the animals, and the small cottage with pride. For the first time in a long while, they felt normal. The widow worked steadily on the farm. She learned more each day, taking on new tasks when she felt ready. The farmer guided her when needed but never hovered. He trusted her ability, and that trust became a source of strength. She earned her place not through pity, but through effort. Evenings were the widow's favorite time. After work was done, she cooked simple meals and sat with her daughters outside the cottage. They talked about school, shared stories, and laughed. Laughter had returned to their lives, slowly but fully. The farmer often passed by during these evenings. Sometimes he stopped to speak, sometimes he simply nodded and continued on his way. His presence was steady, respectful. He did not expect gratitude or praise. He believed that kindness should be quiet. The village changed too. People began to greet the widow with warmth. Some apologized for not helping earlier. Others offered work or support. The silence that once surrounded her suffering had been replaced with awareness. One afternoon, a village meeting was held. People spoke about helping families in need, about looking out for one another. The widow did not attend, but she heard about it later. She understood that her story had reminded people of their shared responsibility. The landlord never approached her again. His power over her life had ended, replaced by independence and dignity. As the season changed, the fields turned golden. The farmer and the widow worked side by side during harvest. Their movements were comfortable, familiar. They spoke little, but understanding passed easily between them. One evening, as the sun lowered behind the hills, the widow stood watching her daughters play. The farmer joined her, standing quietly at her side. She spoke then, telling him that she would never forget the night he chose to help when no one else did. She said his kindness had not only saved them, but had changed the way she saw the world. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he simply said that life had taught him one lesson: help when you can, because tomorrow is never promised. They stood together in silence, watching the light fade. Years later, the cottage was still filled with life. The daughters grew strong and confident. The widow became known as a hardworking, respected woman. The farm flourished, not just in crops, but in spirit. The story of the eviction became something people spoke about with reflection, not shame. It reminded them that one small choice could change many lives. And for the widow, the day she lost her home was no longer the end of her story. It was the beginning of a future built on courage, kindness, and the quiet power of one unexpected gesture.